Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Patrick Lovell coming to you on Valentines Day, February 14th, 2023, at 9 a.m. my time. And it's a perfect time to say I love you to all of the people that have donated to our campaign to purge corruption so far, which I think numbers north of 60 overall. And we're getting a good start. Our initial objective is 1,300. And, I think I was literally. There's not enough hours in the day. 24 hours a day, I'm just obsessed with what is the moment. And last night, is no exception, particularly because, it usually takes maybe a day and a half. That's how fast things move to have mainstream kind of react to what's going on. And we all have immediate communication. But a lot of what I've been talking about on some of these truth bombs over the course of the last couple of days, started to bleed into mainstream. And so I was observing all of the big network heads, if you call it that. Again, it's more like cable echo chamber personalities. But I was just tuning into the three major cable networks last night, and I was just not surprised, but aghast, pissed off, just more determined than ever. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Last night, Rachel Maddow, she does her 1 day a week deal, and it was Monday, and so she was talking about the meltdown and making the connections to, as she does historically, for whatever her story might be. And she was walking through what led to the FDR era, ultimately through the bank runs, right? And there's a lot to that I've brought to your attention over and over and over. But what was fascinating was because Rachel does her monologue, her pre-introduction, and then she gets to her point, and then she had as her guest, of course, Elizabeth Warren. And, and I'd been seeing throughout the day what appears to me to be like, a revisionist history of everything that it is that I'm explaining to you, but also a chance to kind of take a political slam dunk moment. And between President Biden and Elizabeth Warren, from the Democratic side, it was almost an etch-a-sketch of everything that happened during the Obama administration that let Wall Street get away with everything that I'm telling you, that ultimately led to Trump, because there was this massive sort of, at the time, the Occupy Wall Street manifested into Bernie Sanders' campaign, and the Tea Party manifested into ultimately Donald Trump's scenario. And Donald Trump, of course, was able to turn a lot of, white working class who were victims of the 2008 great financial crisis into, supporters, because they had had enough of the 4 decades long neoliberal democratic Wall Street machine that basically sold them down the river. And so a lot of those folks ended up, basically getting punked, of course, by the Trump administration. But the topic of the dialogue last night was in context all of the stuff and how great, the maneuvering and what President Biden's administration did over the weekend, particularly on Sunday. But it kind of spit out into this sort of, and I saw it all over the place, Donald Trump's deregulation of Dodd-Frank during his presidency, circa 2018, and of which I think there was 19 Democrats that signed on to kind of water down the Dodd-Frank law. But let me tell you something. The Dodd-Frank law without enforcement is nothing. And that's the problem. They're talking about regulation again. First of all, you've got a majority of Republicans in Congress who couldn't. They are the dumbest freaking idiots in the history of civilization. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jim Jordan and the rest of these freaking jokers. Not to mention they're oh my God. I swear to God, he's straight out of Jackass, Tucker Carlson, right? And everything that he says, one day, God, would I love to get into, a situation where we could go one-on-one. And maybe if you get behind me, that's a possibility. But the long and the short of it is, there was this sort of matriculation from the right about the causality of the meltdown at the Silicon Valley Bank was fucking woke. What? What the fuck? Dude, I'll be woke all over you like a Mike Tyson uppercut to fucking your bullshit because of what I know and what you don't know and what, Rachel Maddow and Elizabeth Warren aren't telling you. And by her own, sort of self-admission, which was amazing to me, Rachel Maddow says, I think in 3 or 4 times during her conversation, you know what? I'm not really an expert in this stuff. And a eureka bulb went out in my light because I'm a producer. I know editors. I know, how people approach these types of things and zeitgeist. And, what a lot of these people, particularly Rachel Maddow, does is somewhat extraordinary in a sense that she has to turn around stories in very short order and have all the mechanics of these things and kind of get, probably sell off by the the corporate attorneys to make sure that there's not enough liable to be damaging to the network, but at the same time, she's going to tell a story, she's going to be entertaining, and there's a lot that goes into it, right? And the whole time I'm like, she's got resources, she's got a lot of intelligence, and I've been watching her now for over 13 years, and most of the time I've been watching her over the course of the last 13 years is like, why doesn't she say what I'm telling you? Why doesn't she know what I know? And by her own admission last night, she's like, I don't understand this stuff. So the light bulb went out of my mind. It's like, well, maybe they made choices that they're calculating that the only thing, the way that financial stories and stories about banks and everything else, they're going to come through like CNBC, or they're going to come through maybe Fox Business or something like that. That's kind of out of their sandbox. She's going to be focused on politics. And meanwhile, she realizes from time to time that, oh, wait a second, all of politics is monkey wrenched by the scenario that I'm talking about. And so, maybe there is a tiny possibility that she doesn't know what happened to the Obama administration with Eric Holder, who came out of Covington and Burling, and actually they were responsible for MERS that illegally foreclosed on millions of people, while she's actually now talking about, or has been post-insurrection, with the election certification documentation fabrication that we haven't heard a lot about. But boy, that got on our radar, and I think that involved 6 different electoral certifiers, as opposed to what I'm telling you, literally led to tens of millions of documentation fabrication that was used in our court to illegally bulldoze millions of people. But she doesn't know anything about that, nor does she understand why that happened. Why that happened was because of what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the full faith and credit of the United States being used to backstop racketeering, okay? And so, coming back to Elizabeth Warren and Dodd-Frank and really this sort of political sort of slam dunk maneuvering over the weekend. I mean, really, what the Biden administration has done is talked out of both sides of the mouth. They're like, we're not using taxpayer money, because they've learned that from MMT, by the way, because it's not taxpayer money, because the Federal Reserve can create, through Federal Reserve Act 13.3, can digitize money into existence for whatever potpourri of alphabet soup emergency lending stimulus, and they can create these like bank lending windows and loans overnight at 0% interest, and then they can do quantitative easing where they buy the fucking bonds that these asswipes over in Silicon Valley and everywhere else, like Ackman, right? This guy is a guy who was like, oh my God, we're going to have a massive run in our financial system in the event that you guys don't bail out Silvergate, because Silvergate went down because of crypto, but because of the tech stuff up at Silicon Valley Bank. And as it turns out, last night I heard that actually there's a lot of other banks, independent regional banks that are specialty banks, that are on the verge of going, upside down because of the Fed policy of increasing interest rates, because they bought all these bonds at 0% on the long to basically finance, all of these other things that they're involved with. But ultimately, when you have the interest rates go up, the yield just freaking tanks, and so does your buffer. That's a part of just the mechanics of banking, and so that's what's been going on. And but to Elizabeth Warren, again, grandstanding and doing what many in the Democrats know that she basically, look, let's call it for what it is, betrayed Bernie, but then Bernie never told us what the details of fraud were, so they're all playing the game of the corruption. And meanwhile, now we're all kind of like hand-wringing and trying to grandstand about, oh yeah, we made this great move. But meanwhile, as it turns out, it looks like the financial system is still like, basically doing this dance. I mean, I think back to November, December, where CEO Jamie Dimon just basically says we've got a hurricane on the horizon. What degree or what category it is, we don't know. But what his major concern was quantitative tightening. Why? Because the goddamn Federal Reserve had been buying, through quantitative easing, toxic assets that these motherfucking chameleons have been, manifesting through this sausage factory that I've, showed you, that the mechanics of this industry is to basically, through deceptive acts and practices, create sawdust securities that they're making billions of dollars off of fees. And when then they blow up the world, they're the ones that get bailed out. Now, meanwhile, I'm an independent business guy, right? How many of you guys work, right? For me, you got to have streaming income come in to be able to get products made so that you can have a staff, so you can have a production company. And that, nobody's coming to our rescue in the event that, things go sideways and you can't manage, payroll and everything else. Nobody's saying, hey, let me just stroke you a check, or let me just deposit a couple of $1 million in your bank account to make, payroll and that sort of thing. No, man, it doesn't work that way for regular business people. and that's why I try to sort out to all of those who I understand that are on the left that can't stand capitalism and they're mystified and that's the enemy and they want to go full on communism, even though anybody who understands the history of communism knows that A, there's no communist country in the world right now, and B, the guys who are communist leaders like Mao and freaking Stalin, I mean, come on, dude, that's your end game? You know, I'm the big fan of a lot of guys that are very smart in the socialist realm, I'll tell you that. But I mean, look, there's got to be a hybrid of like co-ops and shared, scenarios. And if you want to thrive in certain capacities where you have shareholders that are employees, and that's the thing, and everybody has aligned interest in a specific business, particularly in agriculture, I've seen that work all over the world. And we have hybrid socialisms, for example, in specific areas and some safety nets, and then you've got to have a free market. So it's got to be kind of a combination. But what we're talking about here, people, what we're talking about is fucking crime. It's just simply the mob. It's organized crime. It's deceptive acts and practices. It's lying, thieving, and deceiving. And the problem is the government, and Elizabeth Warren was the best about this forever, the revolving door. So yeah, these CEOs have armies of attorneys. They have armies of law firms. They have armies of ways of, cajoling government who's investigating to make sure they don't do it because they can hang out, the almighty dollar bill and incentives for the guys that are responsible for regulating them to go through the revolving door and get a job with them downstream, which has been going on for 20 years. It's a race to the bottom in the gutter, and it's not just, just law. It's the application of law. So back in the 90s, we ended up gutting regulation, deregulation, desupervision, and decriminalization, which I continue to tell you that allows CEOs under modern executive compensation to use lying, thieving, and deceiving to basically get everybody in the food chain incentivized to lie, steal, and cheat to basically set you up in whatever manner of speaking, whether it's in purchasing a home or in purchasing a lot of things. And everybody, at this stage of the game, I think the consumer's completely complicit because everybody's hanging on by their fingertips. I don't know if there's any really good guy, to be honest with you. But in the end of the day, the entire machine of media, the entire machine of politics, they're all puppeteered by this. They're all in on it. They're all burying you. They're all lying to you. Like, for example, I watched on Sunday, there was a whole host of people in mainstream media on CNN and CBS and ABC and everything else trying to get their heads around this. And of course, they go to talk to the people at the top of this thing that don't want you to know what's really going on. And so they talk out of both sides of their mouth and they confuse you and you have no idea what the hell's going on. This is why I am creating a mammoth populist tidal wave crusade to purge corruption, because I've got all the answers, because I've spent the last 13, 14 years aggregating that stuff at incredible cost and sacrifice and millions of dollars to get this from the top guys that I've done my due diligence as a journalist, because quite frankly, all of media has failed, including the New York Times, including everybody that we're supposed to trust. They're not telling us the story because the system has complete control. And it's not integrity of law. It's not democracy. It's not liberty and justice for all. This is tyranny 101. And the bottom line is guys like Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump are just fucking punking everybody on the right who's looking for salvation, but at the same time, those guys are part of the problem. Tucker Carlson's business model is lying, okay? Donald Trump lied 5,000 times when meanwhile, even before he became president, his entire business model was control fraud. He should have been put in jail. What? Why is he in jail now? And he's walking around, and this is the one thing that Rachel Maddow did right. And it fucking pisses me off beyond belief when she put this together. Eric Kahn, Donald Trump's sons, walking around with some freaking known neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic guy, and there's like these Nazi protests all over the goddamn country, and they're like, oh yeah, blame the Jews, and whatever else they're talking about. Meanwhile, there's a lot of Jews that are in finance that actually are a part of this, that you should never be a part of this. And it's because everybody's a liar. And I'm sick and tired of liars. We have got to rise to the moment. They're just nothing but bullies. They're just nothing. If you think about it as high school, these are fuck faces that would give give somebody a rupee, gang raper, throw it in the trash, and then act as if nothing fucking happened, and they get away with it, and then the administration lets them get away with it because their daddies fucking, send a lot of money to the school or something like that. Look, I am asking you, in fact, I started off with Valentine's Day, and I'm going ballistic. I love the people, all of you who are, champions of liberty and justice for all in your own lifestyle and what you do and everything else. but we have got to come together. We have got to unify millions upon millions of people to come together under this incredible light of truth that I have. And I'm a producer, and I want to create this multimedia like Live Aid revival tour with the truth, where we get millions of people together in different cities across the United States, where I present everything I've got, because it's not getting to people right now. You could go to www.thecon.tv and you could, spend $10 and watch this, but we got, suppressed by Blackstone. I know it, or somebody in intelligence and media, and who fucking knows. While these ass clowns in mainstream media get to lie to us with impunity, or in the case of potentially Rachel Maddow, just not know by her own self-proclamation. I just don't know this stuff. What does that mean exactly? What don't you know? What don't you know about Covington and Burling, which is this mammoth white shoe law firm that I think is equidistant between the White House and the Treasury, or maybe the Federal Reserve, been around for, before the Civil War, and then ultimately has one of its top African-American attorneys get handpicked to become the Attorney General of the United States, and he brings in another guy whose name is Lenny Brewer, is the enforcement operator at the Department of Justice, and both of them just basically lied. What they did was they drew out everything that I'm telling you because the government didn't do the investigation. None of this shit made sense. That's why I did it. Now, they'll tell us that they did the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission, where they had 1,000 witnesses over a year. They spent $11 million to do this, and it was fantastic shit. In fact, everything I'm telling you is in there. In fact, everything I'm telling you is in all the goddamn settlements that the Department of Justice under Holder had with these settlements with $250 billion from the banks, that had these statements of facts that basically say all of the shit that I'm telling you. And it also says that, look, we're going to have these civil freaking scenarios right now where we're going to get our back, a back payment for a bunch of convoluted bullshit that happened in those settlements. But ultimately, then, they left the door open for criminal convictions downstream, which nobody ever picked up the flag to do. Meanwhile, finance has been going nonstop on this whole thing, based on all of the different aspects of control fraud that I'm laying out on you, which laid out into exactly what took place at Silicon Valley Bank, not to mention all the crypto madness that's going on that blew up, Silvergate Bank, and who knows what's going to happen to this New Republic Bank and everything else. Is it calm, or are we on the verge of another economic crisis? I'm not quite sure, but it doesn't matter, because the economic crisis, there's been a depression for millions of you who just don't understand that the money flow just keeps going back to the same people over and over and over and over, and it's all mythology. And it's not free markets. And what they do, I swear to God, especially as it relates to mortgage-backed securities, it's like, do you understand the underwriting process? Who's buying this shit? Where is the value? Where's the money coming from? Who has all of the assets? What are the asset value? Of course, with Silicon Valley Bank yesterday, these whole loans, a $25 billion special purpose vehicle out of the Federal Reserve, is actually predicated on the assets that they have. Well, how was that underwritten? And then ultimately, who's going to sell it? They're going to sell it back to the Fed, and the Fed's going to sell it out to the global market, which is how we finance our government, really, even though some economists don't want to necessarily say that. But it's like, Jesus Christ, we killed the golden goose decades ago, right? We don't produce what we consume. We create a mythical credit sort of scenario where the greatest consumer society in the history of the world is now basically doesn't have $400 in its bank account to get past the next fucking level. And if they get nailed with fees, there's all sorts of tumultuous situation that goes on. And then families collapse, and then divorces, and then suicides, and then homelessness, and all that kind of shit. When meanwhile, we should just be the country of America that I grew up with. The country that has incredibly smart people capable to do anything like go to the moon, go to Mars, put satellites in space, have incredible scientific miracles day in, day out. But what we got to get rid of is this corruption, because the corruption births fascism. Okay? We need tens of millions of you. We need hundreds of millions of dollars to break through this machine that, if you understand the presidential campaign in the midterms, the whole duopoly gets billions of dollars from these guys that are hyena circle jerking us to death because they've got access to the water cannon, the fucking cannon, of the Federal Reserve, which is Federal Reserve Act 13.3. You got to understand the mechanics. You got to understand the details. And if you understand all of that, you'll understand how you're getting jacked in a system where this is just simply the emperor's new clothes. I'm not getting paid millions of dollars to do this. I'm not getting paid thousands of dollars to do this. I'm not getting paid to do this. Eventually, I have a budget in mind for me to be able to do things if I could put it all together, not to mention other things that I'd like to do this. But I'll give you another example of how tough it is when you are an independent guy and you're actually in business for yourself and everything else. I'm working with one of the top celebrities on the planet, or his team, and this guy literally I don't even want to infer who he is, but it's even hard getting projects with him attached off the ground. It's not a slam dunk. People out here work to make things happen, okay? Bill Ackman, who, by the way, was the guy from, barking about there's going to be a run if the government doesn't come in and bail out, which, Janet Yellen and President Biden have been talking out of both sides of the mouth, because it is a bailout and ultimately is the full faith and credit of the United States making sure that they're not shenanigans. I don't know exactly what's going on with all of the different details of all the different companies and tech that are these, VCs. And I mentioned it yesterday. We know that VCs were involved with fucking FTX and crypto. So there's that. And boom, that wasn't really the best usage of underwriting, was it? Or these guys who are geniuses that can do the due diligence and everything else. Come on, man, they're working for fees, and now they're all going to take what I'm telling you and go on overdrive because everybody knows in the system that they got it locked up based on what we just saw over the weekend. And that's not capitalism, because capitalism is risk reward. This is corporate fascist. This is a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses socialism to pay itself. So what I'm asking you is, please, in the regards, in respect, in admiration to what it took to become the United States, to the 13 original colonies that came together in order to form a more perfect union, for better or for worse, that created the Bill of Rights, that created the Constitution, that created separation of powers, and then left it to us to be able to make sure that it works. That's exactly what Thomas Jefferson said. So it's up to you, me, and everybody you see who's not a fucking Nazi to be able to rise to the moment, to fight for democracy, to fight for freedom, to fight for liberty, to fight for justice, to fight for common sense, to fight for sustainability, to fight for the future. And I'm calling this the Clean New Deal. Onwards and upwards.